Some people don't lose themselves loudly. There's no dramatic breakdown, no visible unraveling. They simply wake up one morning and realize they can't remember the last time they said what they actually wanted, the last time they chose something just for themselves, the last time they felt certain about who they are when no one else is watching. You don't notice it happening. Not at first. It begins small. You agree to a restaurant you don't like. You laugh at a joke you don't find funny. You nod along to an opinion that doesn't quite sit right in your chest. And you tell yourself it's not a big deal. You tell yourself you're just being flexible. You tell yourself relationships require compromise. But your body remembers something different. There's a strange weight that starts to accumulate, a quiet discomfort that appears after certain interactions. You replay conversations in your head, not because anything obvious went wrong, but because something feels off. You agreed to plans you didn't want. You stayed silent when you had something to say. You shaped yourself into what the moment required, and now, hours later, you're not sure where you went. This happens again, and again, and again. You start monitoring yourself before speaking. What will they think? How will this land? What version of me does this situation need? The calculation becomes automatic. So automatic you don't realize you're doing it anymore. You just know that around certain people, you're quieter. Around others, you're more agreeable, and alone, you're not sure who you're supposed to be at all. You look in the mirror and something feels wrong. Not your appearance, something deeper. The person looking back seems familiar but distant, like someone you used to know but can't quite place anymore. You search for that feeling you used to have, the one where you knew what you wanted without checking with anyone else first. But it's not there. Or if it is, it's buried so deep you'd have to dig through years of accommodation to find it. And you tell yourself you're overthinking. You tell yourself everyone adjusts in relationships. You tell yourself this is what maturity looks like. But deep down, in the part of you that still remembers what certainty felt like, you know this isn't adjustment. This is disappearance. The exhaustion is what finally gets your attention. Not physical exhaustion, though that's there too. This is something else. A kind of tiredness that sleep doesn't fix. The tiredness of maintaining a performance you didn't audition for. The tiredness of calculating every response, editing every thought, monitoring every reaction to make sure you're being what someone else needs. You can't remember the last time you did something without considering how it would affect someone else first. The last time you bought something just because you liked it. The last time you made a decision without that quiet voice asking, quote, zero. People tell you you're easy to be with, low maintenance, flexible. They mean it as a compliment, and you smile and say thank you because that's what you do. You take the compliment. You don't mention the tightness in your chest. You don't mention that, quote, one feels like a polite word for invisible. You don't mention that you can't remember what your actual preferences are anymore, because you've spent so long prioritizing everyone else's, so you keep going. You show up to gatherings you don't want to attend. You laugh at jokes that don't land. You agree to plans that drain you. And each time you make a silent promise to yourself. Next time, I'll say what I really think. Next time, I'll choose what I actually want. Next time, I'll be honest. But next time comes and you don't. Because somewhere along the way, you learned a painful equation. Being yourself risks rejection. Being what others need guarantees acceptance. and rejection feels like annihilation. So you choose the safer path. You choose accommodation. You choose to be smaller. And that's because what you experienced wasn't a choice you made one day. It was a slow erosion. 1,000 small moments where you chose their comfort over your truth. And now you're here, living a life that looks functional on the surface, but feels hollow underneath. This is how it usually begins. People who lose themselves while trying to be loved rarely look broken on the surface. In fact, many of them appear agreeable, easygoing, even well-adjusted. They don't demand, they don't complain, they adapt. They smile in situations that make them uncomfortable. They say yes when they want to say no. They accommodate schedules that don't work for them. And from the outside, they seem like the kind of person everyone wants in their life. Cooperative, understanding, drama-free. But if you could see inside, you'd find something entirely different. There's a constant hum of anxiety, a low-grade monitoring system that never shuts off. They're scanning the room, reading facial expressions, tracking tone shifts, calculating how to position themselves so everyone else stays comfortable. It's exhausting, but it's also automatic. They've been doing it so long they don't remember what it feels like to just exist without evaluating how their existence is landing. When someone asks what they want, they freeze. Not because they're indecisive, because they genuinely don't know. They've spent so much time figuring out what others want that their own preferences became background noise, static, something vague and distant they can't quite tune into anymore. So they deflect. I'm fine with whatever. You decide. I don't really have a preference. And people believe them. Because why wouldn't they? It sounds like flexibility. It sounds like someone who's genuinely easy to please. What it actually sounds like is someone who learned that having preferences creates conflict, and conflict creates distance, and distance feels like abandonment. They get praised for this, constantly. You're so chill. I love how you just go with the flow. You never make things difficult. The words land like validation. Finally, proof that the strategy works. See? Being easy makes people like you. Being accommodating keeps them close. Being whatever they need ensures they stay. But underneath the praise, something else is happening. A quiet resentment is building. Not the loud, explosive kind. The kind that sits in your chest and hardens slowly. Because every time they say, I don't mind, they do mind. Every time they agree to plans they hate, a small part of them withdraws. Every time they silence their actual opinion to keep the peace, the gap between who they are and who they're pretending to be gets wider. And the strangest part is this. The more accommodating they become, the more invisible they feel. People stop asking what they think. Not because people are cruel, but because they've learned there's no point. Ask someone 100 times what they want and hear. Quote 9 us 100 times, and eventually you stop asking. You assume they really don't care. You assume their lack of preference is genuine rather than protective. So these individuals end up in a painful paradox. They erase themselves to stay connected. But the erasure itself creates the very disconnection they feared. Because you can't be truly seen if you're constantly hiding, and you can't be truly known if the version you present isn't real. They notice this sometimes, in quiet moments, when they're alone and the performance finally stops. They feel the weight of it, the heaviness of maintaining a self that isn't authentic. The exhaustion of trying to remember which version they were with which person. The confusion of not knowing where the performance ends and the real person begins, or if there even is a real person left underneath all the accommodation. That's when the questions start. Quote 10, quote 11, quote 12 more, and the answers don't come easily, because they've been buried under years of prioritizing everyone else's comfort, years of making themselves smaller so others could feel bigger, years of adapting so thoroughly that the original shape is almost unrecognizable. But here's what most people don't understand. This pattern isn't weakness. It's not a character flaw. It's not even a conscious choice most of the time. It's a survival strategy that made perfect sense once, and in some environments, it still makes sense. When you're surrounded by people who require your compliance to feel stable, accommodation keeps you safe. When love has always felt conditional, performing the conditions feels logical. The problem is that safety and authenticity are not the same thing, and what keeps you safe in toxic dynamics will suffocate you in healthy ones. People who lose themselves don't do it because they lack strength. They do it because at some point being strong meant being rejected. And rejection, when you're young and dependent, doesn't just hurt, it threatens survival itself. So they learned, not through conscious decision but through necessity. They learned that their real self was too much, or not enough, or somehow wrong, and the adjusted self was acceptable. That lesson doesn't disappear when you grow up. It just becomes more sophisticated. The child who learned to be quiet becomes the adult who never voices discomfort. The child who learned to anticipate needs becomes the adult who can't stop caretaking. The child who adapted to volatile moods becomes the adult who walks on eggshells even with stable partners. And everyone around them benefits from this. Partners get someone who never complains. Friends get someone who's always available. Workplaces get someone who never pushes back. So the pattern gets reinforced, not maliciously, just naturally. Because when someone makes your life easier by never having needs, you stop noticing they're struggling. There's a strange emotional weight that comes with this, a feeling that you're watching your own life from a distance, playing a character you didn't audition for but can't seem to leave. And that's because what you're experiencing isn't adaptation, it's self-abandonment dressed as love. And that's because people who habitually erase themselves are not driven by generosity. They are driven by something far more painful, a belief learned so early it feels like truth, a belief that says, love is something you earn, and earning it requires becoming exactly what someone else needs. This belief doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive as a conscious thought. It embeds itself quietly, usually in childhood, through 1,000 small moments that taught a simple lesson. You, as you are not enough. Maybe it was a parent who only noticed achievements, who praised the A but ignored the B, who celebrated the trophy but not the effort, who saw the accomplishment but not the child. Love was there, but it came with conditions. Be good, be successful, be easy, be whatever earns attention. Or maybe it was inconsistency, a parent whose mood determined whether you were loved or ignored. Days when affection flowed freely. Days when you couldn't do anything right. You learned to read the emotional weather, to adjust yourself based on which parent showed up that morning. You became a shapeshifter not by choice but by necessity. Or maybe it was criticism disguised as guidance. I'm just trying to help you. I'm doing this because I love you. I want what's best for you. But what you heard underneath those words was different. What you heard was, the way you are isn't acceptable. The way you are needs fixing. The way you are isn't lovable yet. So you adapted. Some children adapt by becoming quiet. Others adapt by becoming perfect. And some adapt by becoming whatever the moment requires, letting their own shape dissolve so they can fill whatever space is needed. At the time, this isn't a choice, it's survival. When you're small and dependent, rejection from the people who care for you doesn't just hurt emotionally, it threatens your safety. So your nervous system learns. It learns to scan for approval. It learns to monitor for signs of disapproval. It learns to adjust before being told to adjust. And here's what makes this so insidious. The adaptation works. When you become what others need, conflict decreases. When you silence your own needs, you're praised for being low maintenance. When you agree instead of argue, relationships feel smoother. The external feedback confirms the internal strategy. See, this works. This keeps people close. But what's actually happening is something entirely different. You're not learning how to be loved. You're learning how to earn temporary safety through self-erasure. You're not learning that you're valuable. You're learning that your value is conditional. You're not building self-worth. You're building a framework where worth must be constantly proven, and that framework becomes your foundation. It becomes the lens through which you interpret every relationship. When someone shows interest, you don't trust it. You immediately begin calculating what they need from you. When someone offers affection, you don't receive it. You start monitoring to see what you must do to keep it. When someone says they love you, you don't believe them. You believe they love the version you're performing. This is why authenticity feels dangerous. Because if love has always been conditional on being a certain way, then being yourself feels like inviting rejection. If acceptance has always required adjustment, then showing your real preferences feels like risking abandonment. If safety has always depended on making yourself easy, then having needs feels like sabotaging your own security. The internal logic is airtight. My real self wasn't enough to be loved. My adjusted self is. Therefore, I must keep adjusting. And so they do. For years. For decades. The child who learned to monitor becomes the teenager who shapes themselves to fit each friend group. The teenager becomes the adult who can't hold on to their own opinions in a relationship. The adaptation that once protected them becomes the prison that contains them. But here's the deepest wound underneath all of this. It's not just the belief that love must be earned. It's the belief that their authentic self is fundamentally unlovable, that who they are underneath the performance is somehow wrong, too much or not enough, too sensitive or too difficult, too needy or too broken. So they hide, not consciously, not with clear intent, but constantly. They hide their real thoughts because those thoughts might cause conflict. They hide their real feelings because those feelings might be too much. They hide their real needs because those needs might be burdensome. They hide their real self because that self they believe is the problem. And the cruel irony is this: the more they hide, the more evidence they collect that hiding is necessary. Because when you only show an edited version of yourself, the love you receive is only for that edited version. And when the love is only for the performance, it confirms the original fear. See? They don't love the real me. They love the version I'm showing them. I have to keep performing. This becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They enter relationships expecting conditional love because that's all they've known. So they perform, and because they're performing, the relationship feels conditional. And the conditional feeling reinforces the need to perform. The cycle feeds itself. Over time, they lose track of where the performance ends and authenticity begins. They've been adjusting for so long that they can't remember what they were adjusting from. They've been shape-shifting for so many years that they've forgotten their original shape. They've been earning love through accommodation for so long that they don't know what it would feel like to just be loved for existing. And this is where the deep sadness lives, not in dramatic moments of pain, but in the quiet recognition that they've spent their entire life trying to become lovable when they were already worthy of love. That all the adjustment, all the accommodation, all the self-erasure was based on a lie they absorbed before they were old enough to question it. The lie that says, "You're not enough as you are." The truth they never learned, "You were always enough." Love that requires you to be someone else isn't love, it's a transaction. And you've been paying a price that was never yours to pay. For these individuals, selfhood is not something stable. It is something they adjust based on who is watching. And the tragedy is this: the more they adjust, the less they know who they're adjusting from. The further they move from their center, the harder it becomes to find their way back. Because the path is covered now, covered by years of performance, layers of accommodation, decades of being whatever kept others comfortable. This pattern often starts in environments where love felt conditional, homes where praise came only for achievement, families where needs were dismissed, relationships where attention required perfect behavior. When a child grows up feeling that love must be earned, they don't learn self-trust, they learn performance. Picture a child bringing home a drawing. Not a good drawing, just a drawing. Something they made because they felt like making it. In some homes, that drawing gets put on the refrigerator. In others, it gets a glance and a "that's nice, honey" before the parent returns to their phone. In others still, it gets criticism. The proportions are off. Why didn't you colour inside the lines? Your sister's drawings are much better. The child learns quickly. Effort without excellence doesn't get attention. Creation without skill doesn't get praise. Being yourself without being impressive doesn't get love. So they stop bringing drawings, or they only bring the good ones, or they stop making them altogether. This lesson repeats in countless forms. The parent who lights up for report cards but barely notices emotional distress. The father who brags about his son's athletic achievements but can't name his son's favourite subject. The mother who praises beauty and manners but dismisses feelings as dramatic or excessive. What the child internalizes is straightforward. My value lies in what I do, not who I am. My worth is measured by output, not existence. Love is a reward for meeting standards, not a given for being alive. Some children receive a different message but equally damaging. The message that their needs are burdensome. The parent who sighs when asked for help. The caregiver who treats normal childhood needs as inconveniences. The home where asking for anything feels like taking too much. These children learn to make themselves small, to need less, to want less, to be less trouble. They learn that love is a finite resource, easily depleted, and their needs deplete it faster than they can replenish it. So they stop asking, they stop needing, or rather they stop showing that they need. The needs don't disappear, they just go underground. Then there are the children raised in emotional chaos, homes where a parent's mood was unpredictable, where morning could bring warmth and evening could bring coldness with no clear reason why, where the same behavior got praise one day and punishment the next. These children become experts in reading emotional weather. They develop a hypervigilance to mood shifts. They learn to scan facial expressions for signs of irritation. They learn to adjust their volume, their energy, their very presence based on the emotional temperature of the room. They become emotional meteorologists, constantly predicting and preparing for the next storm. And here's what makes this particularly painful. These children often love their parents. The parents aren't monsters. They're just unavailable in ways that matter. Too stressed, too depressed, too preoccupied, too wounded themselves to see the child clearly. So the child learns to contort themselves into shapes that might finally be seen. But contortion becomes habit, and habit becomes identity. There are also homes where siblings compete for limited emotional resources, where one child is the golden child and the others are measured against that standard, where comparison is constant, where love feels like a competition someone else is winning. These children learn that being better is the path to being loved, or they learn that they'll never be better, so they become useful instead. The helpful one, the easy one, the one who doesn't cause problems. If they can't be the favourite, they can at least be needed. In all these scenarios, the message is the same. Your authentic self is not enough. Your authentic needs are too much. Your authentic feelings are inconvenient. Who you are must be edited, managed, controlled, or hidden entirely. And so the child begins the work of becoming acceptable. They learn which emotions are allowed and which must be suppressed. They learn which opinions are safe and which cause tension. They learn which version of themselves gets positive attention and which gets ignored or criticized. This isn't conscious. Children don't think, I will now construct a false self to navigate this emotional environment. They simply adapt. Their nervous system adapts. Their behavior adapts. Their sense of self adapts. Because adaptation is survival, and survival is not optional. The tragedy is that these adaptations work. The quiet child doesn't get yelled at as much. The perfect child gets more praise. The accommodating child creates less conflict. The external feedback loop confirms what the child already suspects. See? Being myself causes problems. Being what they need solves them. But what they're actually learning goes deeper than behavior modification. They're learning that their internal experience is not trustworthy, that their feelings are wrong, that their needs are shameful, that their authentic self is the problem that must be solved. So they solve it. They learn to silence the internal voice that says, quote 19, quote. They learn to override the feeling that says, quote 20, quote. They learn to ignore the need that says, quote, 21, quote. They learn to suppress the self that keeps trying to emerge. And that mindset doesn't disappear in adulthood, it simply becomes more sophisticated. The child who learned to monitor a parent's mood becomes the adult who monitors a partner's tone. The child who hid their needs becomes the adult who can't articulate them. The child who made themselves small becomes the adult who apologizes for existing. The adaptation that once kept them safe becomes the pattern that keeps them invisible. They carry those childhood lessons into every relationship, every workplace, every friendship. The belief that love is conditional, the fear that authenticity is dangerous, the certainty that their real self is somehow wrong, and they spend years, sometimes decades, proving that belief right. Not because it's true, but because when you believe you're unlovable, you hide the parts of yourself that most need love, and hidden things can never be loved. So the wound stays open, the belief stays confirmed, and the pattern stays intact. As adults, these individuals often disguise their self-erasure as attention. I'm just being flexible, I'm just being supportive, I'm just trying to keep the peace. But real flexibility doesn't leave you feeling resentful, and real support doesn't require you to disappear, and real peace doesn't demand your silence. What's happening is a continuation of the childhood adaptation, but now it's happening in romantic relationships, friendships, workplaces, and every space where connection exists. The same pattern, playing out in new contexts with the same underlying belief driving it forward. In romantic relationships, this pattern becomes particularly visible. They meet someone, there's attraction, maybe even genuine compatibility. But almost immediately the calculation begins. What kind of person do they want me to be? What interests should I adopt? What opinion should I express or hide? What version of myself will keep them interested? They start watching carefully. If the partner mentions loving hiking, they suddenly love hiking too. Never mind that they've never enjoyed it. If the partner has strong political views, those views become their views. If the partner prefers a certain type of music, restaurant, lifestyle, they shape themselves to match. It happens so automatically they often don't realize they're doing it. It feels like compatibility. It feels like having things in common. It feels like the relationship is working. But what's actually happening is a one-sided merger. One person remains fully themselves while the other becomes a reflection. The sex life reflects this too. They have trouble saying what they want. They focus entirely on the partner's pleasure. They agree to things they're not comfortable with because saying no feels too risky. Their own desire becomes secondary, sometimes invisible entirely. Because if sex is about connection, and connection requires being what the other person needs, then their own needs become obstacles. Over time, they look around and realize they've adopted an entire life that isn't theirs. They're listening to music they don't particularly enjoy. They're attending social events with people they don't connect with. They're living in a city they didn't choose or pursuing a lifestyle that doesn't fit. But leaving feels impossible because leaving means admitting the whole thing was built on performance. In friendships, the pattern is subtler but equally damaging. They become the friend who's always available. The one who cancels their own plans when someone needs them. The one who listens for hours but never shares their own struggles. The one who gives advice they never ask for in return. They tell themselves this is what good friends do. But good friends have boundaries. Good friends have their own lives. Good friends show up authentically, not just helpfully. What they're actually doing is earning friendship through usefulness, and usefulness is not the same as connection. At work, they become the person everyone relies on, the one who takes on extra projects, the one who stays late, the one who covers for others, the one who never says no to management. They tell themselves they're being professional, they're being a team player, they're building their reputation. But what they're actually building is resentment and exhaustion. Because when you say yes to everything, people stop valuing your yes. It becomes expected. And expectations don't come with gratitude or appreciation. They come with more demands. The pattern is everywhere. Every relationship, every interaction, every space where other people exist. They watch, they adjust, they perform. And the performance is so constant, so automatic, so deeply embedded that they've forgotten what it feels like not to perform. They have different personalities with different people. The version they are with their parents is different from the version with their partner. The version at work is different from the version with friends. They're a chameleon, shifting colours based on environment. And if you ask them who they really are, they can't tell you, because they don't know anymore. The exhaustion from this is profound, not the kind you can sleep off, the kind that lives in your bones, the tiredness of maintaining multiple versions of yourself, the fatigue of constant vigilance, the depletion that comes from giving endlessly with no replenishment. They fantasize sometimes about being alone, not because they don't want connection, but because being alone is the only time they don't have to perform, the only time they don't have to calculate, the only time they can just exist without wondering if they're existing correctly. But even alone they struggle, because when you've spent your whole life being what others need, you lose touch with what you need. You can't answer simple questions. What do you want for dinner? What movie sounds good? How do you want to spend your weekend? The questions feel impossible because the answers have been suppressed for so long, they're not accessible anymore. Some of them describe it as living behind glass. They can see life happening. They can participate in life. But there's always this barrier, this distance between what they're doing and what they're feeling, between who they're being and who they are. And the strangest part is that from the outside, many of them look fine. They look happy. They look successful. They look well adjusted. Because they've gotten very good at looking however they need to look. The performance is polished. The mask is convincing. No one sees the person underneath struggling to breathe. What's happening psychologically is a constant power exchange. By hiding their real preferences, they avoid conflict. By silencing their real feelings, they maintain connection. By erasing their real self, they ensure they won't be rejected. It's a trade. Authenticity for approval, self for safety, truth for temporary peace. But the peace never lasts. The approval is for the performance. The love is for the version. And deep down, they know this, which is why they can never stop performing, which is why rest never comes, which is why the anxiety never fully goes away. Because the moment they stop being what others need, they fear others will stop needing them. And being needed, they've learned, is the closest thing to being loved. This is why these behaviors become patterns, not isolated moments. The adjustment happens again. The accommodation continues. The self-erasure never stops. It repeats in every new relationship, every new job, every new environment, not because they're encountering the same people, but because they're carrying the same belief, the belief that their real self isn't enough. And here's what makes it particularly painful. Sometimes they do encounter genuinely kind people. People who would love them authentically. People who want to know the real person underneath the performance. But they can't reveal that person. Because revealing feels too dangerous. Because authenticity has always led to rejection in the past. So they perform even with the safe people. They accommodate even with the accepting people. They hide even when hiding isn't necessary, because the pattern is deeper than circumstance. It's wired into their nervous system. It's embedded in their sense of identity. It's the only way they know how to be in relationship. The cycle becomes self-perpetuating. They erase themselves to be loved. The love they receive is for the erasure, not the self. This confirms that the real self is unlovable. So they erase more. The confirmation deepens, the pattern strengthens, the self disappears further. And the tragedy is this: the more someone relies on self-erasure to feel loved, the more alone they become, because their connection is built on false ground. It depends on them never being fully seen. And a relationship where you can't be seen is a relationship where you can't be known. And a relationship where you can't be known is a relationship where you're fundamentally alone. They can be surrounded by people and still feel isolated. They can be in a committed relationship and still feel lonely. They can be praised and appreciated and valued and still feel empty. Because none of it is for them, it's for the version. And the version isn't real. Over time, this creates a profound sadness. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind that sits in your chest and makes everything feel slightly grey. The kind that shows up as numbness more than pain. The kind that makes you wonder why you feel so disconnected from a life that looks, from the outside, perfectly fine. It's a short-lived relief because the problem is this: the approval they receive is not for them, it's for the adjusted self, the accommodating self, the easy self, and somewhere deep inside they know the difference. They know that if people saw the real thoughts, the real feelings, the real needs, the approval would vanish. So the relief from accommodation lasts only as long as the accommodation continues. The moment they slip, the moment they show something real, the anxiety returns. Did I reveal too much? Did I ask for too much? Did I step outside the acceptable range? And immediately they adjust back, pull back, make themselves small again. This becomes addictive in its own way. Not because it feels good, but because the alternative feels worse. The anxiety of being real is more intense than the numbness of performing. The fear of rejection is more terrifying than the exhaustion of accommodation. So they choose the familiar discomfort over the unknown risk. And each time they make that choice, the pattern deepens, the neural pathway gets stronger, the behavior becomes more automatic, the real self retreats further. What they don't realize is that they're not actually preventing rejection. They're just delaying the discovery of whether rejection would happen. And in the delay, they're guaranteeing a different kind of loss. The loss of themselves, the loss of authenticity, the loss of the possibility of being loved for who they actually are. Because here's the truth they can't see yet. As long as they're performing, they'll never know if someone could love the real them. They'll never get to test whether authenticity leads to connection or abandonment. They'll never discover that some people, the right people, actually prefer the real version to the performed one. They're so busy preventing a hypothetical rejection that they're ensuring a very real disconnection. From others? Yes, but more devastatingly, from themselves. Sooner or later, something breaks. People who maintain themselves in relationships don't need to agree with everything. They don't need to hide their preferences. They don't need to become smaller to make space for someone else. Secure people can say, "I'd rather not" without fear. They can express a need without apology. They can disagree without panicking that disagreement means the end. They understand that difference is not distance, that boundaries are not rejection, that maintaining yourself is not the same as excluding someone else. They have separate lives that don't threaten the relationship, separate friendships, separate interests, separate opinions. They don't need their partner to become them. They don't need to become their partner. There's space for two complete people to exist simultaneously. When someone asks what they want, they have an answer. Not always a strong preference, but at least access to their own internal signal. They can say Thai food without immediately checking to see if that's okay. They can suggest an activity without preparing 3 backup options in case the first one doesn't land well. They can exist without constant negotiation. In disagreements, they can hold their ground, not aggressively, not defensively, just calmly. I see it differently. It doesn't feel like a declaration of war. It feels like honesty. And honesty, even when it creates temporary friction, feels safer than performance. They're comfortable with silence. They don't need to fill every gap in conversation. They don't interpret quiet moments as signs of disconnection. They can sit with someone and just be, without performing interest or energy or engagement they don't genuinely feel. Most importantly, they can tolerate disappointing someone. Not in cruel ways, not in careless ways, but in human ways. They can say no to plans. They can ask for alone time. They can prioritize their own needs occasionally without collapsing into guilt. Because they understand that disappointing someone in small ways is not the same as betraying them. Healthy relationships allow for all of this. They allow for difference, for separateness, for two people to remain distinct while still being connected. Connection doesn't require merger. It doesn't require one person to evaporate so the other can expand. It requires presence, not performance. In contrast, people who lose themselves struggle deeply with any form of separateness. Separateness feels like rejection. Having different opinions feels like conflict. Needing space feels like abandonment. So they eliminate separateness. They mirror opinions. They stay constantly available. And in doing so, they eliminate themselves. They look at secure people and feel confused. How do they disagree without fear? How do they state preferences without guilt? How do they maintain boundaries without believing they are being selfish? It looks almost impossible from the outside, like a skill they were never taught, a language they never learned to speak. And they're right. It is a skill. One that's learned in childhood when love is given freely, when a child's no is respected, when a child's preferences are honoured, when a child's separate existence is celebrated rather than threatened. But for those who didn't learn it early, the skill looks like confidence they don't possess, selfishness they were taught to avoid, cruelty disguised as honesty, because they've been operating from a different framework entirely, a framework where love is earned through accommodation, where connection requires self-erasure, where safety depends on making yourself easy. From that framework, secure behaviour looks risky, dangerous, like inviting the very rejection they've spent their life avoiding, so they stay in their pattern, even when they see a different way, even when they want a different way. Because wanting it and believing it's possible for them are two entirely different things. What many people don't realise is that this pattern is not love gone wrong. It is survival learned too early. Often these individuals were not emotionally seen as children. Their feelings were minimized, their struggles were dismissed, their needs were treated as inconveniences rather than valid experiences of a developing person. So they learned to protect themselves by becoming invisible. If my feelings cause problems, I'll hide my feelings. If my needs are burdens, I'll stop having needs. If my authentic self creates distance, I'll create a different self entirely. This is a trauma response, not the dramatic kind that gets recognized and treated, the quiet kind that gets labeled as being easygoing or not needing much or just naturally accommodating. The kind that flies under the radar because it doesn't cause problems for others. It only causes problems for the person carrying it. And because it doesn't look like trauma, it doesn't get addressed as trauma. It gets reinforced, praised, rewarded. The person gets positive feedback for the very behavior that's slowly eroding their sense of self. And the positive feedback makes them believe the behavior is healthy when it's actually a symptom of an old wound that never healed. Underneath the accommodation is often a deep fear. The fear of being too much. The fear of being exposed as fundamentally unacceptable. The fear that if they stop performing, people will finally see the truth they've been hiding. The truth that they're not actually easy or flexible or accommodating by nature. They're terrified and compensating. This fear runs so deep that it shapes everything. Every interaction is filtered through it. Every relationship is built around it. Every choice is made to avoid triggering it. The fear becomes the foundation, and a foundation built on fear creates a life that feels precarious no matter how stable it looks from the outside. What makes this particularly painful is that these individuals often have highly developed emotional intelligence. They can read a room instantly. They can sense mood shifts before anyone else. They can predict what people need before people know they need it. But all that intelligence is turned outward, toward managing others, toward preventing rejection, toward maintaining safety. They have almost no ability to turn that same intelligence inward, to sense their own needs, to honor their own feelings, to predict what they themselves might need in a given situation. That capacity has atrophied, or maybe it never developed at all, because survival required external focus, and you can't focus in two directions at once. So they become experts in everyone else and strangers to themselves. They know exactly how to make someone else comfortable, but have no idea how to make themselves comfortable. They can regulate someone else's emotions but can't access their own. They can anticipate someone else's needs but can't articulate their own. This is why they often describe feeling empty. Not depressed exactly, not anxious exactly, just empty. Like there's supposed to be something inside, some core self, some internal compass, and it's just not there. Or it's there but buried so deep under layers of accommodation that it might as well not exist. Adaptation without authenticity becomes imprisonment. What started as a survival strategy becomes a cage. And the cage is particularly cruel because it's invisible. From the outside, they look free. They look successful in relationships. They look like they have it all together, but inside they're trapped in a pattern they can't escape because they can't even fully see it. And here's what makes escape so difficult. The pattern isn't maintained by external force. It's maintained by their own beliefs, by the story they tell themselves about who they are and how love works. Change isn't about confronting someone else. It's about confronting the fundamental beliefs they have held about themselves since childhood. And those beliefs feel like facts, like truth, like the way reality simply is. Challenging them feels like denying reality rather than questioning a learned pattern. So the pattern stays, not because it's working, not because it feels good, but because changing it feels impossible. Underneath that adaptation is often a deep sense of illegitimacy, a quiet belief that their real self is fundamentally unacceptable. So they keep performing. They perform agreeableness. They perform contentment. They perform lack of need. And they measure their worth by how little space they take up, by how few problems they cause, by how easy they are to love. But easy to love is not the same as being loved. And taking up no space means no one knows you're there. This is why interactions feel so draining. You are unknowingly participating in your own erasure. Your silence becomes your disappearance. Your compliance becomes your cage. Your fear of rejection becomes the rejection of yourself. The toll this takes is not always obvious. You don't necessarily collapse. You don't necessarily break down. You just slowly become less vibrant, less certain, less present, less you. Depression shows up, but not always in recognizable ways. It's not always sadness. Sometimes it's numbness, a feeling of going through motions without connection to what you're doing. You're functioning, working, socializing, checking all the boxes, but none of it feels real. None of it touches you. You're watching your life happen from behind glass. Anxiety is constant but subtle. Not panic attacks necessarily, just a low-grade hum of worry that never fully turns off. Did I say the wrong thing? Are they upset with me? Should I have handled that differently? The monitoring never stops. The calculation never rests. Even in supposedly relaxing moments, you're scanning for signs that you've failed to be what someone needed. Physically, the body keeps score. Fatigue that sleep doesn't fix. Tension that won't release. Headaches. Digestive issues. Illness that seems to appear without clear cause. Your nervous system is in a constant state of mild activation, always monitoring, always preparing, always adjusting, and that takes a toll on the physical system that was never meant to operate at that level continuously. The mornings are often the worst. You wake up and for a brief moment you're just you, and then consciousness fully returns, and with it, the awareness of all the roles you have to play today, all the versions you have to be, all the adjustments you have to make, and you feel the weight of it before you even get out of bed. You dread social interactions, even with people you care about, not because you don't want to see them, but because seeing them requires performing. And you're so tired of performing, but not performing isn't an option you can see, so you go. You perform, you come home exhausted, and the cycle continues. Making decisions becomes paralyzing, even small ones. What to eat, what to wear, what to do with free time, because you've spent so long deferring to others that your own decision-making capacity has weakened. You second-guess every choice. You look for external validation even for things that should be purely personal preference. The questions you can't answer pile up. Who am I? What do I actually want? What do I actually believe? What do I actually feel? These should be simple questions, but for you, they're impossible, because the answers have been suppressed for so long that accessing them feels like trying to remember a language you used to speak but have completely forgotten. Resentment builds quietly. You can't express it because expressing negative feelings goes against the entire pattern. but it's there, under the surface. A quiet bitterness toward the people you keep accommodating, a frustration with yourself for continuing to accommodate, an anger that has nowhere to go so it turns inward. And the inward-turned anger becomes self-criticism. You blame yourself for feeling resentful. After all, no one is forcing you to say yes. No one is demanding you hide yourself. You're doing this voluntarily. So clearly, you're the problem. This logic feels airtight even though it's completely missing the point. You're not choosing this in any real sense. You're responding to deeply embedded programming that makes authentic choice feel impossible. The identity confusion is perhaps the most destabilizing part. You genuinely don't know who you are. You can describe what you do, what roles you play, how others see you. But if someone asks who you are underneath all of that, you have no answer. And that absence where your self should be is terrifying. Some people describe it as feeling fake, like an imposter in your own life. You're pretending to be a person, but there's no one actually there. You're a collection of responses to external demands rather than a person with internal coherence. Others describe it as feeling multiple, like they're different people in different contexts with no through line connecting them. The person at work bears little resemblance to the person at home. The person with friends is unrecognizable to the person with family. And none of them feel true. They all feel like masks worn for different audiences. The loneliness is profound. You can be surrounded by people and feel completely alone. Because no one knows you. How could they? You've never shown them. You've shown them versions, performances, carefully curated presentations of acceptable traits, but not you. And you can't feel connected to people who don't actually know you. And that is not harmless. People who chronically abandon themselves begin to lose access to their own internal compass. They hesitate before expressing any preference. They question their own perceptions. They internalize the belief that their real self is fundamentally wrong. Over time, this creates a subtle erosion of self-trust, and that is not a small thing. When you can't trust your own feelings, you can't make decisions that serve you. When you can't trust your own perceptions, you can't identify when something is genuinely wrong. When you can't trust your own needs, you can't advocate for yourself. Self-trust is the foundation of functioning, and without it, you're building a life on ground that constantly shifts beneath you. So what do you do when you recognize this pattern? First, you stop pretending you don't know. You've known for a while that you've been hiding. You've known that the person you present isn't the person you are. And acknowledging that, just acknowledging it, is the first act of self-reclamation. Acknowledgement doesn't require immediate change. It doesn't require you to suddenly become a different person. It just requires honesty about what's been happening. I have been performing. I have been hiding. I have been erasing myself. This is what I've been doing. That acknowledgement might bring grief. You might mourn the years spent performing, the relationships built on false foundations, the life you constructed around other people's needs while neglecting your own. Let yourself feel that grief. It's not self-pity, it's appropriate sadness for a real loss. Second, you start noticing when you self-erase. Not to stop it immediately, just to see it. You're about to agree to plans you don't want. Notice that. You're about to hide an opinion because it might cause friction. Notice that. You're about to silence a need because expressing it feels too risky. Notice that. Awareness before action. Observation before intervention. You can't change what you can't see, and you've been doing this so automatically for so long that bringing it into conscious awareness is itself a major shift. You might be surprised by how often it happens, how many times in a single day you adjust yourself, how many micro moments of self-abandonment accumulate into a life spent being someone else. This sheer frequency can be overwhelming, but it's also clarifying. Oh, this is bigger than I thought. This is more pervasive than I realized. Third, you practice micro-authenticity. These are small moments of truth, not grand declarations, not dramatic confrontations, just tiny acts of being real. Someone asks where you want to eat. Instead of quote 28, you say quote 29. Your voice might shake. Your heart might race. You might immediately want to take it back and defer, but you said it. You stated a preference. That's practice. Someone suggests plans you don't want. Instead of automatic agreement, you pause. Quote 30. Or even, quote 31. You might feel guilty immediately. You might worry you've damaged the relationship, but you didn't erase yourself. That's practice. Someone asks your opinion on something. Instead of mirroring theirs or deflecting, you offer yours. Even if it's different, even if it might create friction, your stomach might drop. Your mind might scramble for ways to soften it or take it back. But you spoke your truth. That's practice. These moments will feel wrong at first. They'll feel selfish. They'll feel risky. They'll feel like you're being difficult or demanding or too much, because you've internalized the belief that having preferences makes you a burden, that stating needs makes you needy, that being yourself makes you unlovable. But feelings are not facts. The anxiety you feel about being authentic doesn't mean authenticity is dangerous. It means you've been conditioned to fear it, and conditioning can be questioned. Slowly, carefully, one small act of truth at a time. Fourth, you tolerate the discomfort of being seen. This is perhaps the hardest part. When you stop performing, people notice. Some will be confused, some will be irritated, some will push back. Quote 35. And every part of you will want to retreat, to go back to performing, to smooth things over by erasing yourself again. Because the discomfort of being seen feels unbearable when you've spent your life hiding. But this discomfort is not danger. It's unfamiliarity. It's the feeling of doing something your nervous system hasn't experienced as safe. But unfamiliar is not the same as unsafe. And discomfort is not the same as harm. You sit with the discomfort. You notice it without immediately acting to eliminate it. You breathe through the anxiety of having stated a need. You survive the guilt of setting a boundary. You endure the fear that comes after showing something real. And here's what you discover. The catastrophe you feared doesn't happen. Or it happens and you survive it. Someone is disappointed and the relationship continues. Someone disagrees and they don't leave. Someone sees the real you and they're still here. Not always. Some people will leave. Some relationships won't survive your authenticity. And that's information. Painful information, but crucial information. If a relationship requires your self-erasure to exist, it wasn't actually a relationship with you. It was a relationship with your performance. And losing that isn't losing connection. It's gaining clarity. Fifth, you find your internal signals again. You've been disconnected from yourself for so long that reconnecting takes practice. It's like learning to hear a sound that's been present all along but drowned out by noise. You start checking in with yourself throughout the day. Quote 36. Not what you should feel, not what makes sense to feel, what you actually feel. Sometimes the answer is, quote 37, "That's okay, you're asking, that's what matters. You practice body awareness. Your body has been sending signals you've been trained to ignore. Tension, discomfort, ease, resistance. You start noticing those signals instead of overriding them. When your stomach tightens before agreeing to something, that's information. When your shoulders relax after declining something, that's information. You experiment with preferences. You try different foods, different activities, different experiences, and you notice your genuine response. Not what you think you should enjoy, not what others would approve of, what you actually enjoy." This sounds simple, but it's not. You've been so disconnected from your authentic preferences that discovering them feels like meeting a stranger. You create space for yourself. Time alone. Time where you're not performing for anyone. Time where you can just exist without monitoring how that existence is landing. This might feel uncomfortable initially. You might not know what to do with yourself. That's normal. You're learning to be with yourself again. And perhaps the most important realization of all is this: being yourself is not selfish. It is the only honest thing you can offer. Because when you hide who you are, the love you receive isn't for you, it's for a performance. And a performance, no matter how good, cannot sustain a soul. Love that requires you to disappear isn't love. It might be attachment, it might be convenience, it might be need, but it's not love. Love doesn't require erasure. It doesn't demand performance. It doesn't ask you to become smaller so someone else can feel bigger. Real love has space for your real self, for your preferences, for your needs, for your boundaries, for your separate existence. And if the love you're receiving doesn't have that space, it's not the love you need. This doesn't mean everyone will love the real you. They won't. But the people who do, who love you authentically, create connection that actually nourishes rather than depletes. Connection where you can rest instead of perform. Connection where you can be known instead of hidden. And that connection is worth the risk of losing the relationships built on performance. Because those relationships were costing you yourself, and you can't afford that cost anymore. Over time, these patterns don't stay confined to romantic relationships. In close relationships, people who lose themselves often blur the line between love and accommodation. They frame self-erasure as devotion. They frame silence as peace. And slowly, the relationship becomes a place where only one person fully exists. This manifests in countless ways. They stop making plans with friends because their partner might need them. They cancel commitments at the last minute because their partner's mood shifted. They stop pursuing interests their partner doesn't share because doing things separately feels like creating distance. They adopt their partner's entire social circle, not because they genuinely connect with these people, but because maintaining separate friendships feels like having a life outside the relationship. And a life outside feels threatening, like evidence they're not fully committed, like space where rejection could grow. Their partner's family becomes their family. Their partner's traditions become their traditions. Their partner's beliefs become their beliefs. Political views, religious perspectives, lifestyle choices, all of it gets absorbed, not questioned, not discussed, just absorbed. Because disagreement feels dangerous. The relationship becomes the only thing. Work exists. Family exists. But everything is filtered through the lens of how it affects the relationship, how it affects the partner. Every decision is made with that as the primary consideration, not joint consideration, not mutual negotiation, just automatic prioritization of the partner's preferences. And here's what makes this particularly painful. The partner often doesn't demand this. They might not even want it. They might prefer their partner to have a separate life, to have their own opinions, to maintain their own identity. But they don't get that partner. They get the accommodating version, the merged version, the version that dissolved to fit. Over time, this creates an imbalance. One person in the relationship is three-dimensional, full, complete, still themselves. The other is two-dimensional, flat, a reflection rather than a person. And that imbalance creates distance even though it was meant to create closeness. Because intimacy requires two people, two real people. If only one person is real, there's no intimacy. There's dependency, there's enmeshment, there's merger, but not intimacy. Intimacy requires being known. And you can't be known if you're not revealing yourself. The physical intimacy suffers too. Sex becomes another space for performing, another area where they monitor and adjust. They focus entirely on the partner's pleasure. They agree to things they're uncomfortable with. They hide what they actually want or need. They can't be vulnerable during sex because vulnerability requires showing your real self, and the real self is precisely what they're hiding. They often describe feeling used, not because their partner is using them, but because they're offering a body without a person attached. They're there physically but absent emotionally, going through motions but disconnected from sensation. And sex without presence is just mechanics. The resentment grows. They resent the partner for their needs even though the partner hasn't demanded anything excessive. They resent themselves for accommodating. They resent the relationship for requiring so much performance even though the requirement is self-imposed. The resentment has nowhere to go because expressing it means acknowledging the pattern. And acknowledging the pattern means facing how complicit they've been in their own erasure. So they stay quiet, they keep accommodating, they keep erasing, and the relationship continues, functional on the surface, hollow underneath. Sometimes their partner senses something is wrong. Quote 38, quote 39, quote 40, and they panic, because honesty feels impossible. How do you say quote 41 without destroying everything? So they reassure. Quote 42, and the pattern continues. This isn't because you're weak, it's because you learned that love requires sacrifice. But love that requires you to disappear isn't love. It's erasure with a softer name. In work environments, this pattern can be equally damaging. These individuals often position themselves as team players. They take on extra projects. They stay late. They cover for colleagues. They agree to unreasonable deadlines. They accommodate others' schedules endlessly. But what looks like dedication is often depletion. They say yes to every request. The manager who asks them to take on additional responsibility. The colleague who needs help with their workload. The client who demands work outside scope. They say yes because saying no feels dangerous, like it might mark them as difficult, as not a team player, as someone who doesn't care about the mission. So they overfunction. They do the work of multiple people. They stay hours past when they're scheduled. They check emails on weekends. They make themselves available at all times, and the praise comes. Quote 43, quote 44, quote 45. But reliable becomes indispensable, becomes trapped, because once you've established yourself as the person who never says no, saying no becomes a betrayal of expectations. People aren't asking anymore, they're assuming. Assuming you'll stay late. Assuming you'll take on the project. Assuming you'll fix the problem. And you can't advocate for yourself. Can't ask for a raise because asking feels presumptuous. Can't request better conditions because requesting feels demanding. Can't set boundaries around your time because boundaries feel selfish. You're grateful to have the job, grateful to be valued, grateful to be needed, and gratitude, you believe, requires endless accommodation. Meanwhile, colleagues who set clear boundaries advance. People who say no when they're at capacity are respected for knowing their limits. People who advocate for themselves get raises and promotions, and you stay exactly where you are, working harder and harder while others move forward. The resentment here is particularly bitter. You're doing more work than anyone else. You're sacrificing more. You're giving more. And you're getting less. Less money, less advancement, less appreciation than you deserve. But the resentment can't be expressed because expressing it means admitting you've been allowing this. And admitting that feels like acknowledging your own failure. The physical toll is severe. Stress-related illness, burnout, exhaustion that compounds until even basic tasks feel overwhelming. Your body is trying to tell you that this is unsustainable. But you override those signals because overriding is what you've always done. And the cruel irony is this. You think you're making yourself valuable. You think being indispensable means job security, but it doesn't. It means you're doing multiple jobs for one salary. It means you're being exploited even though no one is intentionally exploiting you. You've simply made it so easy for them not to notice. True collaboration honors limits. This behavior erodes them, and over time, these individuals don't advance. They just work harder while others move forward. The system benefits from their inability to say no, and they stay trapped in a pattern that feels like dedication, but functions like self-destruction. In families, this pattern often feels normalized. A sibling who always defers, a child who never asks for anything, an adult who still monitors their parents' mood across the dinner table. Because it's familiar, it feels unavoidable. They're the one everyone calls when they need something, the one who hosts every holiday, the one who mediates every conflict, the one who takes care of aging parents, the one who never needs taking care of in return. Their role was assigned early. Maybe they were the oldest, maybe they were the most compliant, maybe they were the one who adapted when everyone else was falling apart. However it started, it stuck. And now, decades later, they're still playing that role. Family gatherings are exhausting. They're performing the expected version. The helpful one, the easy one, the one who doesn't make waves. They can't express their real opinions because their real opinions might cause conflict. They can't express their real feelings because their real feelings might burden others. They can't express their real needs because having needs violates their assigned role. So they show up, they help, they accommodate, they go home depleted, and no one notices because this is just how they are. This is just what they do. The family has come to expect it, to rely on it, to take it for granted. Sometimes they try to change the dynamic. They try to set a boundary. Quote 46. Immediate pushback. Quote 47. Quote 48. Quote 49. The message is clear. Deviating from your role creates problems. Stay in your role. Keep things functioning. Don't disrupt the system. So they back down. Never mind. I'll figure it out. It's fine. And it continues. The generational pattern is often visible if you look. The parent who was lost is raising a child who is lost. The same dynamic playing out again. The same conditional love. The same messages about worth and acceptance. The same adaptation being learned. And the cycle perpetuates. But familiarity does not mean health. Many adults carry versions of themselves that were assigned in childhood, and these versions keep performing long after anyone asks them to. They're performing for people who might have changed, for dynamics that might have shifted, for expectations that might not even exist anymore. But they can't risk finding out, because if they stop performing and the rejection comes, it confirms what they've always feared, that their real self is unacceptable. So they keep performing, keep the role intact, keep the family peace by keeping themselves hidden. Breaking this cycle requires something that feels uncomfortable at first: self-awareness. For the person who loses themselves, awareness is terrifying because it reveals the gap between the life they're living and the self they've buried, and that gap is painful to acknowledge. Awareness means seeing clearly what you've been doing, not with self-judgment, though judgment often comes, just with clarity. I have been hiding. I have been performing. I have been prioritizing everyone else's needs while ignoring my own. This is what's been happening. That seeing brings grief, deep grief, for the years spent invisible, for the relationships that never knew the real you, for the life constructed around fear rather than truth, for the person you might have been if you'd believed you were acceptable as you were. You might grieve the childhood you didn't have, the one where you were allowed to be yourself, where your needs were met without performance, where love was given freely. You didn't get that. And acknowledging that hurts. You might grieve the relationships that were built on false foundations, the friendships where you were always giving, the romantic partnerships where you were always accommodating, the family dynamics where you were always playing a role. These relationships might have felt real, but they were real connections to a performed self, not to you. You might grieve the opportunities you missed, the career paths you didn't pursue because they might have caused friction, the experiences you avoided because they didn't fit the acceptable version, the life you could have lived if you'd claimed your right to live it. This grief is not self-pity. It's not wallowing. It's appropriate sadness for a real loss. The loss of yourself, the loss of years, the loss of possibilities that were sacrificed to maintain safety that was never really safe. And alongside the grief comes fear. The fear of what happens next. If I stop performing, who am I? If I stop accommodating, will anyone stay? If I show my real self, will I be alone? These fears feel enormous, paralyzing, proof that changing is too dangerous. But these are the same fears that created the pattern in the first place. The fear of rejection, the fear of abandonment, the fear that authenticity leads to loss. These fears have been running your life, and awareness means seeing that too. Seeing how much power you've given to fear, how much of your life has been organized around avoiding a hypothetical pain. Awareness also means recognizing how the pattern has harmed you, the depression, the anxiety, the physical illness, the disconnection, the emptiness, the resentment, the exhaustion. This hasn't been working. It's been costing you dearly. And awareness means understanding that this isn't your fault. You didn't choose this consciously. You adapted to survive. You learned what you were taught. You responded to the environment you were in. Blame is not helpful here. Understanding is. But awareness also means accepting responsibility for what happens next. You can't change the past. You can't undo the years spent performing, but you can choose differently now. And that choice is yours. No one else can make it. No one else can rescue you from this pattern. The work of reclaiming yourself is yours alone. That responsibility can feel overwhelming. It might feel easier to stay unconscious, to keep performing without seeing it clearly. Awareness demands something from you. It demands that you face the discomfort of change, that you risk the very rejection you've spent your life avoiding, that you prioritize your truth over temporary peace. But awareness also brings something essential: clarity. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Every time you catch yourself about to accommodate, you'll know what you're doing. Every time you start to perform, you'll feel the mechanism clicking into place. And in that knowing, there's a choice point, a moment where you can choose differently. Not always, not perfectly, but sometimes, and sometimes becomes more frequent. The awareness grows, the choice points multiply, and slowly, gradually, you start to live less from the pattern and more from your actual self. But for the person beginning to wake up, awareness is both devastating and liberating. It allows you to separate what you chose from what you were conditioned to choose, and that distinction changes everything. You can have compassion for the person who adapted to survive, while also refusing to let that adaptation continue to run your adult life. Sometimes that awareness begins with a question. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, "I'd rather not." Two small words that feel like defiance when you've spent a lifetime accommodating. The first boundary feels impossible. Your heart races. Your mind floods with justifications for why you should just agree. Your body prepares for rejection like it's preparing for physical danger, because to your nervous system it is danger. Boundaries have never been safe before, but you say it anyway. "I'd rather not go," or "that doesn't work for me," or "I need some time to myself." The words come out shaky, quiet, almost apologetic, but they come out. And then you wait. You wait for the explosion, the rejection, the proof that being real destroys connection. Your anxiety spikes. Every second of silence feels like confirmation that you've done something terrible. But often nothing dramatic happens. The person says okay, or they're mildly disappointed but accept it, or they ask if another time works better. The catastrophe you feared doesn't materialize, and you're left with this strange mixture of relief and confusion. It was supposed to be dangerous. It was supposed to lead to abandonment, but it didn't. This doesn't mean boundaries always go smoothly. Sometimes people do push back. That's not like you. Since when do you care about that? You're being selfish, and that pushback triggers every fear you've ever had. See? This is why I don't do this. This is why I stay small. But here's what you're learning to see. Their discomfort with your boundary is not evidence that the boundary is wrong. It's evidence that the dynamic is shifting. And people who benefited from the old dynamic will resist the shift. Not because they're bad people, because change is uncomfortable, because they've gotten used to you being a certain way, because your accommodation made their life easier, and now it's not as easy. Their discomfort is theirs to manage, not yours to prevent. This is perhaps the hardest lesson. You're not responsible for managing everyone else's emotional response to your existence. You're not required to make yourself small so others can feel big. You're not obligated to erase your needs so others don't have to consider them. You start practicing this in small ways. Someone suggests a restaurant, you suggest a different one. Someone makes plans for you, you decline. Someone expects you to accommodate, you don't. Each time feels risky. Each time triggers guilt. Each time you have to actively resist the urge to take it back and smooth everything over. But each time you don't take it back, you build evidence. Evidence that boundaries don't destroy you. Evidence that stating preferences doesn't end relationships. Evidence that the catastrophe is not inevitable. You also start noticing how others respond. Some people adjust easily. They respect the boundary without drama. They might even seem relieved that you're being more honest. These are your people. The ones who want the real you, not just the accommodating version. Others escalate. They become more demanding, more critical, more insistent that you return to the old dynamic. They frame your boundary setting as you being difficult, changed, selfish, not yourself. They apply pressure to get you back in line. And this is where clarity comes. These people don't want you. They want your function. They want what you do for them. They want the emotional regulation you provide. They want the accommodation that makes their life easier. But they don't want you. Because they are telling you directly that you being yourself is unacceptable. That hurts, but it's information you need. Not all relationships are meant to last forever. Some exist to teach you where your edges are. And when you honor those edges, some people fall away. Not because you failed, but because the relationship was never built on authentic connection. It was built on your performance. Letting those relationships go feels like failure at first. You wanted to believe that everyone would adjust, that setting boundaries would improve relationships, not end them. But some relationships can't survive your authenticity, and that's okay. Painful, but okay. Because what you're making space for is relationships that can hold the real you. Relationships where you don't have to perform, where you can disagree without fear, where you can have needs without guilt, where you can be fully present because you're not hiding. These new relationships feel different, quieter in some ways, less dramatic, less intense, but deeper, more stable. There's less anxiety because you're not constantly monitoring. There's less exhaustion because you're not constantly performing. There's more ease because you're actually there, and you start to realize something profound. Connection based on truth is different from connection based on accommodation. It's slower to build. It requires more vulnerability. It feels less immediately gratifying, but it's real. And real connection sustains you in ways performance-based connection never could. One of the hardest lessons to accept is that not everyone wants you to be real. Some people prefer the version. And when you stop offering that version, the relationship reveals its true foundation. Those who value you will adjust. Those who needed you small will resist. This is not a failure. It's clarity. The guilt that comes with boundaries doesn't disappear quickly. You set a boundary and immediately feel selfish. You decline something and immediately wonder if you should have just said yes. You express a need and immediately want to take it back. This guilt is not evidence that you're doing something wrong. It's evidence that you're doing something unfamiliar. You've been conditioned to believe that having boundaries is selfish, that expressing needs is burdensome, that being yourself is too much. So when you do these things, guilt is the natural response. But you learn to sit with the guilt instead of letting it dictate your behavior. You feel the guilt and maintain the boundary anyway. You notice the guilt and recognize it as an old pattern rather than current truth. You acknowledge the guilt and continue being honest anyway. Over time, the guilt lessens, not because you've become numb or selfish, but because you're building new neural pathways. You're teaching your nervous system that boundaries are safe, that expressing needs doesn't lead to abandonment, that being yourself is not only acceptable but necessary. The moments of authenticity start to accumulate, each small act of honesty, each boundary maintained, each need expressed, each preference stated. They build on each other, and slowly you start to feel more solid, more present, more real. You catch yourself mid-performance sometimes. You're about to agree to something you don't want and you stop. Mid-sentence, you stop. You take a breath. You tell the truth instead. It feels awkward, but it's real. Or you're in a conversation, about to mirror someone's opinion, and you pause. You remember you have your own opinion, and you offer it. I see it a little differently. Your voice might shake, but you said it. These moments feel like small victories, because they are. Each time you choose truth over performance, you're choosing yourself. And choosing yourself is the practice that rebuilds the self you've lost. What's important to understand is that this pattern does not come from weakness. It comes from a childhood where being yourself felt dangerous, where love was conditional, where survival required performance. The child who learned this was doing the best they could. They were adapting to survive. They were responding to the environment they were in. They developed a strategy that worked in that context, and that strategy kept them safe for a time. But what protected you then imprisons you now. The adaptation that made sense in childhood becomes the cage in adulthood, because adult relationships require mutuality. They require two whole people, and you can't be whole while you're performing. You can understand the origin of this pattern without excusing its continuation. You can have compassion for the child who learned to hide without letting that child run your adult life. You can honor the survival strategy while also acknowledging it's no longer serving you. This isn't about blame. The people who taught you this pattern likely learned it themselves. The conditional love you received was probably the only love they knew how to give. The criticism, the dismissal, the expectation of performance, they may have experienced all of that too and were simply passing it forward. Understanding this doesn't erase the harm, but it does soften the edges. It allows you to see that no one in this story is a villain. There are just wounded people, wounding each other. Patterns passing through generations, adaptations that made sense once, but have outlived their usefulness. And you can be the one who stops it, who sees the pattern clearly and chooses differently, who breaks the generational transmission, who learns to love differently than you were loved, who builds a life based on authenticity instead of performance. But that choice requires something difficult. It requires you to feel the fear you've been avoiding, the fear of rejection, the fear of abandonment, the fear of being truly seen and found lacking. You have to feel these fears without letting them dictate your choices. You have to risk the very thing you've spent your life preventing. You have to show yourself and face the possibility that showing yourself leads to loss. That risk is real, the fear is valid, but the alternative, spending your life hiding, has its own cost, and you've been paying that cost for long enough. And while understanding this can soften your self-judgment, it should never delay your self-reclamation. Compassion does not mean staying invisible. You can honour the child who learned to disappear while refusing to let that child run your adult life. You can hold both truths simultaneously. You adapted for good reason, and the adaptation is now hurting you. Both are true, and both matter. The work isn't about judging yourself for the pattern. It's about seeing the pattern clearly and choosing to build something different. Not quickly, not perfectly, but steadily. One honest moment at a time, one boundary at a time, one act of self-reclamation at a time. The most meaningful shift happens when you stop performing from old patterns, when someone expects accommodation and you offer honesty, when someone expects agreement and you stay anchored in your truth, when someone expects you to shrink and you remain full-sized. That quiet presence is not loud, but it is deeply unsettling to people who relied on your absence. The shift isn't a declaration. You don't announce, quote, 60, quote. You just start showing up differently. You start responding from your actual self instead of the performed version. And people notice, not always consciously, but they sense something is different. Some will be curious, and you can be honest or not, or the specifics don't matter as much as the consistency. You keep showing up as yourself. Some will be threatened, not because you're doing anything to them, but because the dynamic has shifted. They were comfortable with the old version, the accommodating version, the version that made their life easier, and now that version isn't available. You're not hostile, you're not cold, you're just not erasing yourself anymore. And that shift creates discomfort for people who are benefiting from your self-erasure. They might escalate, they might test you, they might try to provoke the old dynamic by creating situations where you usually would have accommodated, and you have to stay steady. Not combative, not defensive, just steady. Quote 64. No long explanations, no justifications, no over-apologizing, just clarity. The temptation to return to performing is intense. Everything in you wants to make the discomfort go away by going back to what's familiar. The guilt is overwhelming. The fear is loud. The old pattern is right there, waiting, familiar and safe in its own painful way. But you stay with yourself. You tolerate the discomfort. You breathe through the anxiety. You sit with the guilt without acting on it, and you discover something crucial. You can survive being disliked. You can survive disappointing someone. You can survive the temporary rupture that comes with being real. The people who truly care about you, who want connection with the real you, will adjust. It might take time. They might be confused at first, but they'll make space for the shift. They'll welcome the more honest version. They'll appreciate knowing the real you instead of the performed version. These people will tell you things like, quote 65 or quote 66 or quote 67, and those responses feel strange because you expected rejection. But what you're finding is that some people prefer authenticity. They were just waiting for you to offer it. And then there are the people who can't adjust, who keep pushing for the old dynamic, who frame your authenticity as you being difficult or changed or not yourself, who make it clear that they want the version back and they're not interested in the real you. And you have to let them go, not with anger, not with drama, just with acceptance. Some relationships can't survive authenticity, and that's painful information, but it's also clarifying information. You now know what that relationship was actually built on. not you, your function. The space that opens up when those relationships end feels empty at first, lonely even. You might doubt whether the shift was worth it. You might wonder if you should have just kept performing. At least then you had people. At least then you weren't alone. But that's not actually what you had. You had people who were connected to a performance, not to you. And being surrounded by people who don't know you is its own kind of loneliness. More painful in some ways than being actually alone. Because at least when you're alone, you're not pretending. And in that empty space, something new can grow. Relationships based on truth. Connections based on mutual authenticity. People who see you and choose you anyway. Not because you're easy or accommodating or performing, but because you're you, and you being you is enough. These relationships feel different. There's less intensity because there's less anxiety. There's less drama because there's less performing. There's more steadiness because there's more truth. You can rest in these relationships. You can be yourself without calculation. You can disagree without fearing abandonment. The shift also changes how you experience yourself. When you stop performing, you start to remember who you are. Preferences emerge, opinions solidify, needs become clear. The static that's been obscuring your internal signal starts to clear. You rediscover things you used to enjoy, hobbies you abandoned, interests you suppressed. Parts of yourself you packed away because they didn't fit the acceptable version. And bringing those parts back feels like reuniting with old friends you'd forgotten existed. You start to trust yourself again. Your decisions feel more solid because they're coming from you, not from a calculation of what others want. Your choices feel more authentic because they're based on your actual preferences, not on avoiding rejection. The anxiety lessens over time, not because life becomes less challenging, but because you're not carrying the additional weight of constant performance. You're not monitoring and adjusting and calculating every moment. You're just being. And being is less exhausting than performing. This is where healing truly begins. Not in changing others, but in choosing yourself without hostility. You don't need to confront everyone. You don't need to explain your evolution. You don't need to justify your existence. You need to remain whole. You need to keep showing up as yourself even when it's uncomfortable, even when people push back, even when you doubt whether it's worth it. Because the alternative, returning to performance, returns you to the slow erasure you've been experiencing, and you can't afford that cost anymore. The shift is quiet. It's not a revolution. It's a series of small choices. Each time you stay honest instead of accommodating. Each time you maintain a boundary instead of collapsing it. Each time you choose your truth instead of their comfort. Those small choices accumulate into a life that feels fundamentally different. A life where you're present, where you're known, where you're connected to yourself and to others in ways that actually nourish instead of deplete. Where you're not spending all your energy maintaining a performance, where you can rest, where you can be. Over time, as you stop performing, something shifts. Over time, as you stop erasing yourself, the exhaustion lifts. Not all at once, but gradually. You stop monitoring every word. You stop calculating every interaction. You start speaking more clearly. You start resting more deeply. You start living more fully. The relationships that survive the shift become richer. There's more honesty, more depth, more actual connection because you're actually present. You can disagree without the relationship feeling threatened. You can have needs without feeling guilty. You can be yourself without fear. And new people start appearing. People who are drawn to authenticity rather than performance. People who want to know the real you. People who are doing their own work of reclaiming themselves. These connections feel different, easier in some ways, more mutual, more balanced. You attract people who don't need you to be small. People who challenge without diminishing. People who see difference as expansion, not threat. People who respect boundaries. People who appreciate honesty. People who create space for your full existence. Conversations change. You're not trying to figure out what they want to hear. You're just saying what you actually think. And that freedom transforms how you experience connection. It's no longer a performance to maintain. It's an exchange between two real people. You notice your body relaxing. The constant low-grade tension that's been there for years starts to release. Your shoulders drop, your jaw unclenches, your breathing deepens, because you're not holding yourself in a constant state of preparation for rejection. You're allowing yourself to just exist. The decisions you make start to feel more aligned. You choose work that actually interests you instead of work that looks impressive. You pursue relationships that feel nourishing instead of relationships that feel like obligations. You spend time in ways that replenish you instead of deplete you. You reconnect with yourself, with your preferences, with your desires, with your values. The things that matter to you become clear because you're not filtering everything through "what will others think?" You're asking quote 69. And the answers start coming, not all at once, not in a dramatic revelation, but slowly, quietly, one preference at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of clarity at a time. You start to enjoy your own company. Being alone is no longer just an escape from performing, it's actually pleasant. You're getting to know yourself again, and you're finding that you're actually interesting, that you have thoughts worth thinking, that you have feelings worth feeling, that you have a self-worth being. The voice in your head changes. The critical voice that was always evaluating whether you were performing correctly starts to quiet. In its place, something gentler emerges. A voice that validates your experience, that honors your needs, that supports your choices. Your own voice, finally given permission to speak. You make mistakes. You're learning a new way of being. And learning involves fumbling. Sometimes you overcorrect. You become too rigid where you were too flexible. You become too defended where you were too open. But these are learning edges, and you adjust as you go. The important part is that you're learning. You're not staying stuck in the old pattern. You're trying, you're risking, you're showing up as yourself even when it's imperfect. And that trying matters more than getting it exactly right. People from your past sometimes reappear. Old friends you lost touch with because you were too busy performing for others. Family members you distanced yourself from because being around them required too much accommodation. And with these people, you get to try again, this time as yourself. Some of these reconnections work, some don't, and that's okay. You're not here to force connection. You're here to offer authentic presence. And some people can meet you there, others can't. Both outcomes are acceptable. You also start to notice patterns you missed before. You see how certain people bring out the performing in you, not because they're bad people, but because something about the dynamic triggers the old pattern. And you can make choices about those relationships. Sometimes you work on staying authentic in them. Sometimes you create distance. Both are valid responses. The work continues. This isn't a one-time fix. It's an ongoing practice. Each day you're choosing truth over performance, choosing yourself over approval, choosing authenticity over temporary peace. And each day those choices get slightly easier, not because the fear disappears, but because you build evidence that the fear is manageable, that you can survive being real, that authenticity doesn't destroy you, that showing yourself, while risky, is also liberating in ways performance never was. You start to feel proud, not in an arrogant way, in a quiet way. Proud that you're doing this hard thing. Proud that you're reclaiming yourself. Proud that you're building a life based on truth instead of fear. That pride nourishes you in ways external validation never could. Because external validation was always contingent on performance. This pride comes from honoring yourself, and no one can take that from you. You realize that the most powerful response to a lifetime of performing is standing fully in who you are, not explaining yourself, not apologizing for yourself, not diminishing yourself, just being yourself without negotiation. And that's how you know you're healing, not because you're perfect, not because you never struggle, but because you're present, because you're known, because you're you, and you being you is finally enough. In the end, the psychology of people who lost themselves while trying to be loved reveals something both painful and hopeful. You cannot be loved for who you are if who you are remains hidden. The performance might earn approval, the accommodation might earn appreciation, the self-erasure might earn a place in someone's life. But none of that is love, not real love, not the kind that nourishes, not the kind that sustains. Real love requires being known, and being known requires being seen, and being seen requires showing yourself, all of yourself, not just the acceptable parts, not just the easy parts, not just the parts you think others want. All of it. That vulnerability feels impossible when you've spent your life believing your real self is the problem. When you've been hiding for so long that hiding feels like safety and showing feels like danger. But the safety of hiding is an illusion. You're not safe. You're just invisible. And invisible is its own kind of death. You're not here to earn love through erasure. You're not here to purchase connection with your silence. You're not here to pay for belonging with your disappearance. Those transactions might look like relationship, but they're not. They're performances, and performances end. Your presence does not need to be earned. You don't need to become smaller for others to have space. You don't need to become quieter for others to feel heard. You don't need to become less for others to feel like more. That equation never balanced. It never will. You deserve to be loved as a child simply for existing. You didn't need to earn it through achievement or compliance or performing. You needed it freely given. And if you didn't get that, if love came with conditions, that wasn't your failure. That was a failure of the people whose job it was to love you unconditionally. And you deserve to be loved now simply for existing, not for what you do, not for what you provide, not for how easy you make things, just for being human, for being yourself, for being alive. The people who cannot love you without your performance cannot actually love you. They can love the function, the accommodation, the ease, but not you. And losing their approval is not losing love. It's losing a transaction that was costing you yourself. The moment you stop accepting self-abandonment as the price of love, everything shifts, not immediately, not without discomfort, but surely. The people who need your performance to feel stable will fall away, and in the space they leave, people who want your presence will arrive. Relationships where you don't have to hide, where you can disagree, where you can need, where you can be imperfect and still be wanted, where you can show all of yourself, not just the palatable parts, and be met with acceptance rather than rejection. These relationships are possible. They exist, but they require something from you. They require you to show up authentically, and you can't show up authentically while you're still performing. You can't be known while you're hiding. You can't receive real love while you're offering a false self. So the work is this: learning to choose yourself, learning to honor your own needs, learning to trust your own feelings, learning to maintain your own boundaries, learning to be yourself without apology and without leaving yourself behind. Not because it's easy, it's not. Not because it guarantees everyone will stay, it doesn't. But because it guarantees you will stay. You'll stay present in your own life. You'll stay connected to yourself. You'll stay whole instead of fragmented into multiple performed versions, and wholeness is what allows for real connection. Not the fragmented performance-based connection you've been experiencing, but actual connection, where two whole people meet, where vulnerability is possible because authenticity is present, where love is given freely because it's not contingent on performance. This is what you've been missing. This is what all the performing has been trying to create but never could. Because performed connection is not real connection, and earned love is not free love, and conditional acceptance is not true acceptance. You've spent enough time being what others need. You've spent enough years earning what should have been freely given. You've spent enough of your life hiding the very self that most needed to be seen. The most powerful response to a lifetime of performing is this: standing fully in who you are, without explanation, without apology, without making yourself smaller to fit someone else's comfort. Just being, just existing, just allowing yourself to take up the space you've always deserved to occupy. That is not selfish. That is not too much. That is not demanding. That is simply being human. And being human is enough. It was always enough. You were always enough. The world just didn't tell you that. So you spent your life trying to become enough through performance. But you can stop now. You can put down that burden. You can release that performance. You can come home to yourself. And in coming home to yourself, you create the possibility for others to meet you there. Not the performed version. You. The real you. The you that's been waiting. Quietly. Patiently. Hopefully. To finally be seen.